Hunter gave earlier, and how the regulatory process is structured relative to water discharge permits. First and foremost, the Clean Water Act, enacted by Congress, gives EPA the authority to establish drinking water standards, and they do that based on studies, much like what we're looking at here with GenX. And through the years, they've established many drinking water standards for the many of the known carcinogens that are in our environment. As the EPA establishes those standards, if they delegate a program to a state like North Carolina, as they have done for the wastewater discharge system, we have the authority to issue permits for those regulated pollutants. And that gets to the whole issue of unregulated pollutants. EPA then continues, they have a program called the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule. And in that, they take samples. They require a lot of the drinking water systems across the country to take samples, and they assess what pollutants are most prevalent, and then they rely on health studies to try and figure out those that are most problematic to the public health. And so as those unregulated pollutants, as more data becomes available, a lot of times they become regulated pollutants and they become part of the permits. And so it gets back to what we believe we have the authority to regulate under our permitting system. So it was the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality that issued what's called the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES permit, to the company.
Dr. Knappe?
And while this process is correct, I would like to say that EPA hasn't regulated a new man-made chemical for over 20 years.
Any response?
No, there's no response needed. It's just a fact. You know, so while the process is entirely correct, the appetite to regulate a new man-made chemical is next to zero.
Question for Mike Brown, CFPUA Board Chair. The internal communications of CFPUA are not public records. Will CFPUA release the correspondence of Mike Richardson, Mike McGill, and other current and former officials who were in a position to know about GenX contamination prior to public disclosure?
First of all, a matter of correction, we are a public entity. All internal communications are public record. We'd be very forthcoming with any requests. We've tried to be very forthcoming with any requests. You know, EPA began studying this topic back in 2012, correct, Dr. Knappe? We began our study, Mike Richardson partnered to provide samples to Mr. Knappe here in 2015. Those results came out in 2016. A lot of questions have been asked, you know, why don't we say something earlier, et cetera, et cetera. I guess it's been punctuated very well here tonight. We've got 16 experts here tonight. We've had a community of 225,000 people talking about it for 24 days now, and the answers, we're still searching for answers. So to put that in context, hit the rewind button and go back to 2016. We got a study, there's data that indicated that this is, you know, this substance is in the water, but we didn't have a lot of context to that information, to that data. I mean, quite frankly, now we've got more context, but back then we didn't have a whole lot of context, and we began working on it and having conversations with Dr. Knappe. We certainly knew EPA was aware of it. We certainly let DEQ was aware of it, and those are our regulators. So, I mean, as a local public utility, we want to participate in these scientific studies because by participating in them, you advance science and you advance down the path towards discovery. And but at the time, we didn't have the context. We still don't have full context on what the data meant. And we certainly were talking to our regulators, EPA and DEQ. I just want to clarify that point. But we are a public entity, and to answer your original question, happy to make full disclosure of any and all information.
And Dr. Knappe, I know that, and I know when you said it earlier, you said you're to blame for all of this, but, I think people are grateful for the work that you've done in uncovering this in the paper river. So I definitely want to take a moment to say that. Dr. Knappe, at the time when you did this study, this study was done, again, as you said, 2012, and then it was published in a journal 3 or 4 years later. Once more, it was identified. It took time to research it. When it was published in a journal, do you feel like at that point maybe the CFUA may have read that journal and been aware of it 2 years ago? Or what are your thoughts on that? Because I was curious about that as well.
Yes, so, the timeline for this process, was a lengthy one. We took the first samples in 2013, got a first data set, first time discovered this compound GenX. In the process of science, doing something once is nice, but we always look for reproducibility. So we went out and sampled again in 2014. At that time, we discovered all of these other compounds. They were just peaks on a chromatogram, but we didn't know what the structures of these compounds were. So that took another year to identify what these compounds are. And this is difficult, and this was done actually by my EPA research colleagues. And we want to be very sure in the end that what we're saying is actually true. Because if we put out something that in the end is shot down, then we really failed. We failed the community because we caused a panic, and we failed as scientists. So the process of discovery is slow, and then the question of what does it mean? Well, we're learning even today, and that's something, I've gone back also, at what point is the right point to say something and to say something to whom? And in the end, regulatory bodies are the ones who failed, and in the end, Chemours is the one, or DuPont earlier, who discharged this. And, I think the focus should really be primarily on that. And it's very important as scientists to put out correct information. And through a peer review process, both internal to EPA and through a peer review process through other academics, we ended up publishing those papers. At that point, we really wondered, how can we get Chemours to stop? And that was really our top objective. I think we accomplished that through the help of also Von Haggerty's article. I think that's an amazing article. So that's kind of the timeline of the story. And I know maybe not everybody is happy with CFPUA or maybe the speed of the discovery process or the disclosure process, but the goal has always been to stop this discharge and to have data to make this happen.
Thank you, Dr. Knappe. As we await the test results, good question, and either Sheila Holman, NCDQ, or someone else can answer this question. Why do we have to send the samples out of state, Colorado, for testing, and why does it take a month to get results? And in our reporting, I understand we've also sent samples to a facility in Raleigh as well, RTP is also. Can you talk about the GenX sampling that's being done, the tests that were taken away through DQ and through Chemours?
Yes, thank you for that question. And yes, we are sending the samples to 2 different labs, one to the lab that Dr. Knappe worked with, that's the EPA Office of Research and Development Lab in Research Triangle Park. We want to be testing for the same, or we are analyzing for the same suite of compounds that Dr. Knappe covered in his study, so that we understand the various concentrations of all of those components. The lab that in Colorado is one that Chemours was going to be sending their samples to, and so we asked them to pay for analysis for the 12 sampling sites that we're doing each of 3 weeks. We're now talking with EPA about a longer-term sampling program. But in the meantime, we did work out with EPA ORD, Office of Research and Development, to do the analysis for the samples as well. So we want to basically make sure that there's some independence between the sample analysis, and so we think that having the 2 labs will provide that.
Thank you. Mike Brown, CFUA again. It seems as if the researchers from the Netherlands are ahead of us in their understanding of this issue. Would the CFUA be willing to bring a scientist from that team as a consultant?
Well, I guess to that end, I guess a better question would be, are we, when you look at the hierarchy, EPA, DEQ, local water provider, state and local healthcare professionals, hospitals, et cetera, I guess the question would be, I think there's no doubt that we all want to learn more and learn from this experience and get better. CFUA is 150% on board with that. I guess the better question would be, are we the best entity to bring that person in-house, and is that the most efficient use of funds? In other words, if we brought someone in-house and used our funds to do that, are we better off processing it in-house than kicking it up the line to the health department, DEQ, EPA, or is a better use of our collective resources to have EPA have that person on their staff, or DEQ have that person on their staff? So I guess the answer is yes. If it was effective, we'd certainly be interested in that, but what we're most interested in is the most efficient way to improve the process. So we're happy to be active partners in that, however that might be.
Thank you, sir. To Dr. Joseph Wald-Ramsing, what solutions did they find in Holland? Has the problem there been solved? And if you can give a little background on that.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, a very similar situation. Chemour also has a plant in the Netherlands that is producing GenX, and sort of a similar disclosure process happened about a year ago, a discovery process for some scientific studies that were done. But there, indeed, that was literally 1 year ago in May of 2016, and the federal environmental authorities acted very quickly to shut down that process, and immediately they forced the company to immediately stop. So there was a quicker speed of motion, let's say, in getting things done there. They've also been, as I mentioned at the beginning, because of some of the public pressure related to the remedy aspect, have been able to pressure the company into taking some remedial measures, like providing drinking water. They are also have committed to paying for some tests, human tests, on the studies there. So that is certainly happening there. Again, I would say that there are certainly a lot of lessons that can be learned from that process, where it seems like things moved more quickly than they have here. So that's would be interesting to continue that conversation.
Thank you. This question for Jim Flechtner with CFUA. Who is going to pay for the water filtration systems and homes and businesses, and for the bottled water used during the time that this is being studied?
It's a good question, and I'd like to say I share the public's concern. As a provider of public water, this is our business, and we have 300 people who have dedicated their lives and their careers to providing water and sewer services to this community. I know they're as concerned as everybody else is about this. Our goal is to get our water and keep our water ready for people to use. And with the GenX stock no longer being discharged, we have our own monitoring program underway, so we can track that, report that to the public, and restore that confidence that we've built that the water we provide is suitable to drink. And we're also looking, thank you, at options that we can use at our water treatment plant to treat for compounds such as GenX. There are ways we can change our filter media out. That would not be a hugely expensive proposition. But before we take that on, we need to make sure it's going to work, and we need to make sure it's not going to have unintended consequences in terms of hurting the quality of the water. We need to make sure it's the right solution. The So that study's underway, and part of that is also to look at reverse osmosis for our plant. And what we're hearing and finding from our consultants is that would be about 90% effective of getting compounds such as GenX out of the water. But I can tell you it would be exceedingly expensive. It would be in excess of $100 million to retrofit our plant for that.
And I guess a follow-up, I know that we've done stories on local businesses that are buying the reverse osmosis water filtration systems for their businesses, but our understanding is that's not enough, it has to be a plant. Can anyone clarify that? Because if people are spending money buying these for their homes and it's not 100% guaranteed to, exclude GenX from the water once it's becoming drinking water out of the system, can anyone kind of touch on that subject?
Well, we're looking at 90% for our plant, but I really couldn't speak to what a household system might do. That's not our.
Anyone else on the panel?
And I'll give it a shot. Again, no data available on GenX and really the other ethers that are present at higher concentrations. There's been a lot of talk about GenX, but GenX is only about 0.5% or so of the total fluorochemical load in the river. So, changing out the filter media with activated carbon was suggested. That would take care of some of the GenX, or it would last for a short time before the carbon would have to get changed out. But the other compounds, we published that also in the paper, are essentially non-absorbable by activated carbon, and that would be the same in home filters that rely on activated carbon only. There are reverse osmosis type home filters under the sink type filters that, in my opinion, would remove GenX and the other ethers very well. And I'm saying that based on the removal of compounds that are structurally similar in size as well. It would not work it would work some for GenX, but not for the shorter chain ethers that are also in the water. I couldn't hear. Bituminous coal will work for GenX for a short amount of time, but GenX is just a small fraction of the total. The shorter chain compound that dominates the signature of PFAS in the water is not removed by activated carbon.
Thank you, Ken Knappe. This is from Mark Benton, DHHS. I'm going to try to read this. In the Knappe study, GenX was only a small portion of the chemicals in the samples. Would the risk still be low if all the chemicals were considered?
The only, first of all, thank you for the question. The only compound that we have looked at right now with the available evidence is GenX. We are anxious and would be willing to look at any of the other compounds that were listed, but the only one that we have sort of analyzed to date has been GenX.
Follow-up question. Is there any plans for any studies of any other compounds or any other chemicals that could be in the water? Kind of follow up to see if there is anything else in there other than GenX, because I think that's a concern.
And actually, that's a very easy answer, and the answer is yes. For any of the compounds that are found, we're happy to analyze those. Much of our work will be based upon the evidence and the research studies that are out there, but we are happy to dive into and look into whatever we know that's out there in the field as far as any of the compounds that were listed in the report.
And Dr. Knappe, I know you went there with the intention, this was part of a study for you, you weren't looking for GenX, it came about. Was there anything else you saw in the water while you did your study?
So the one other compound we've been looking at is 1,4-dioxane in the Cape Fear River, and that compound is effectively treated by ozonation in the Sweeney plant. It gets about 2/3 out, so the levels of 1,4-dioxane in the Wilmington drinking water are quite low. But that's a much bigger concern upstream, in upstream communities, especially on the Haw River.
I was listening to you and my boss at the same time. I'm sorry, sir. It's hard being a host. Okay. First and foremost, I still have more questions here, and believe it or not, there are about maybe dozens of questions that are still written in the back. We would like for the panelists and members of the media that are here right now from Star News and other outlets, after this is over, if you could go to the back, we'd love to be able to ask you these questions so that we can get answers to put online and on our station as well and on the radio. So we also want a commitment from each and one of you that you will be able via email or on the phone to answer the questions that the audience has, because I know no one wants to be here till midnight, but I know we still want to get the questions answered as well. Can we get that commitment from everyone? Okay. I do realize, as we mentioned earlier, that Comores did not send a representative, as you see, but there are people that are here from CFUA, that are here from the DEQ, and as she mentioned, her daughter goes to UNCW. So we want to take a moment, and we do want to thank you all for being here, because I know that this can be a very emotional topic for a lot of people who live here and are dealing with this and concerned. So we just want to thank you for being here, and if everyone would give you just a round of applause for being here and for taking these questions. Thank you. Because again, you could have declined the interview like some people did. So thank you. Star News is offering a toxic water crisis newspaper for you to pick up as you leave. And I want to commend the Star News as a fellow journalist for their groundbreaking article that they did to expose this. So we want to thank the Star News for that, because it has opened eyes in a lot of people. If there's something that you saw today and maybe you missed it, we will have this again tomorrow. We'll air the entire 2-hour live feed. We're going to replay it tomorrow on our website, www.aytv3.com. Also, again, as we mentioned, all these questions that we didn't get answered, we will get some responses, because they've committed to it, to be able to get you those answers online, and also we will have that for you. We want to thank you all for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it, and as Pam mentioned earlier, it shows that not only do we care, and not only are we dedicated to getting answers and reporting on this on radio with WHQR, in the paper with Star News, on WWAY, but also that the community cares as well. So we want to thank you all for coming out, and we appreciate your support in this. And we will continue to follow this story every day. No one's giving up on this as we get answers, and we are just, weeks away from finding the results, correct, on what is found in the water with the GenX testing. So we will have that for you as well. Again, thank you all for coming out, and thank you to all the media partners for participating in this, and I hope to see you tonight on WWAY at 11. Thank you.